I always thought my grandmother's room had its own weather. Even with the window shut, you could feel a cool draft slipping under the curtains, carrying a faint smell of camphor and rosewater. The air was slow there, as if it ripened before it moved. After the funeral, I stood in that doorway, palms damp, and the house listened back. Her bedspread had the careful weight of someone who straightened their life every morning. On the dresser, a china dish of pins, a lacquered hair comb, a glass bottle with a ring of dust around its neck. Her mirror, forever tilted not at herself, but toward the window, so it could keep one eye on the light. Only the closet remained closed, a quiet mouth. When I opened it, the mothball scent rose like a white veil clean, medicinal, a little sad, dresses in faded greens and sun-softened blacks, hangers that creaked like old knuckles. On the floor, a tin trunk with its lid scabbed by travel stickers whose colors had bled into sepia. I knelt, and the wood chilled my knees through the fabric of my pants. The trunk's metal latch fought me at first, then gave with a tired gasp. Inside, paper that had become the color of tea. Envelopes bound with pale ribbon. A small music box shaped like a swallow, its tail broken off and tucked beside its body like an apology. Every object felt curated by silence. I lifted the top layer like a thin layer of frost. The music box still worked barely. When I wound it, the melody emerged like someone remembered in pieces. A hesitant ballerina of notes turning in a room too small for her arms. The song wavered through the air and plucked something tight inside me. Beneath it lay a handkerchief embroidered with red thread. The letters were neat and small. LRLR was not my grandmother's initials. Her name had no R, no red thread, no flourish. The embroidery had been done by a careful child, each stitch a measured breath. The edges were scalloped and a corner was stiff with an old stain that had dried to the color of rust. I brought the cloth to my face and the set unfurled soap, rain, and something like wheat. Tucked deep in the trunk, I found a notebook wrapped in oilcloth. When I unwrapped it, the oilcloth sighed, releasing the stored breath of 50 summers. The notebook's pages were thin, soft, and frayed along the edges like shoelaces. On the inside cover, a sentence written in pencil. The graphite smudged, but legible, for the day you forgive the child you were. My grandmother's handwriting was a landscape I recognized. Small hills of vowels, a river of consonants. The way she pressed harder when the word ate. She dated the first entry with a year I never placed her in. A year that belonged to trains with iron lungs and riverbanks without railings. The paragraph was short. The air around me thickened, then yielded that I did something once. She had written, and I have held it my whole life like a found shell that cuts the palm if you squeeze. I was not older than the apricots. That was how she measured time. by fruit and floods. She was a child in a village where the mill sang all day and stopped only when the moon lowered its eyes. There was a boy at the mill, no more than a pair of bright shoulders in my memory, who could whistle the birds down from the wires. He laughed like pebbles in a jar. We traded secrets behind the sackcloth. We were matching red ribbons once, twinned at the end of our braids, mine in my hair, his looped around his wrist. A joke, a challenge, a summer oath. That season, the river swelled. It turned green and wild, a wet animal shouldering the banks. The adults spoke heavier, as if their voices might weigh the water down. On the day of the flood, she and the boy Luca, the initials suggested, were sent with bread to the neighbor whose wife had just birthed twins. They cut across the mill yard, the air smeared with damp flour. The bridge was just a plank hung by stubborn rope. The river worried at it with its black tongue. You could feel the water in your bones before you saw it, a hush that pressed the ears from inside. She stepped first, then froze. A glass bottle spun in the eddy below, as if asking to be read. Luca grinned and bounced the plank once with his heel just to frighten her. She wrote that she laughed, that she hated herself for laughing as the loaf slipped from her arms like a warm animal. She wrote that the rope cried out a thin, desperate sound, then bit into the wood. The plank held, the bag of bread did not. It sailed and sank. A brief dark mouth swallowed it whole. My fault, she wrote, and the pencil notch deepened into the page. They turned back. The neighbor waited without bread, the twins without the crusts that comforted their mother's jaw. That night, the storm broke the clouds into nails and pounded them into the roof. In the morning, the mill song was a cough. Luca did not come. He had gone to the river to look for the loaf, for the joke, for the dare he'd started. And the river took his wrist. The ribbon, the red one, was found on a reed where the water had licked and left it. She pocketed it, then stitched the letters into a handkerchief because she could not sew the world back. No one blamed her, she wrote. They brought soup and said her name with both hands. But guilt grew its own bones in the night and slept beside her, curling into the shape of her shadow. She carried the handkerchief like a relic. When she left for the city, packed into a train that smelled of iron and oranges, she folded the cloth into the lining of her coat. She tried to forget the river's hymn. She learned the names of streets and the way to eat an apple quietly. But every time it rained, her breath remembered the timing of the plank. Years later, photos in the notebook showed faces I knew only by jawline, and the way grief sits in the corners of mouths. She met my grandfather at a tram stop, it said, while holding a bag of cherries, like a bouquet turned inside out. He made a small life with her, the kind that fits in a pocket and warms it. When they married, she wore a dress borrowed from a neighbor's cousin and hid the handkerchief inside her sleeve. She tried, again and again, to send letters to the village with the river's old teeth asking for the neighbor's family, for the twins, for any rumor of a boy who could whistle water tame. Sometimes a letter came back with a stamp that said moved in a language only the postman understood. She kept those, too, as if being unable to return had a shape worth keeping. I made my life out of carefulness, she wrote. I made it quiet and still, like a pond after the geese have gone. Her lines were not confessions so much as topographies, elevations of regret and tenderness. When my mother was born, she wore upon tiny hats and counted each stitch aloud, like beads, like prayers. On the first storm of that winter, the music box broke its tail. She told no one, not even herself in the mirror, what she named the guilt. But here, in gray pencil, she wrote that she sometimes recited the alphabet and skipped the letter L, as if the alphabet were a rosary and one bead burned. She wrote that she never crossed bridges without pressing her thumb to her wrist to feel the blood and not the rope. At the bottom of the notebook sat an envelope that had softened into something like fabric. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen, a girl with her hair in a braid, chin lifted, wearing a ribbon at her wrist like a dare or a vow. Beside her, a blur someone turned just as the camera blinked. The river behind them was a strip of pewter, smooth as a blade. I turned the photo over in my grandmother's hand for the boy who laughed at the river and gave me its language. I stayed kneeling on the floor as the evening moved along the walls like a slow brush. The house made its small sounds, the pipe's throat clearing, the refrigerator's yawn, the window's thin inhalations. The notebook lay open on my thighs, breathing with me. The secret wasn't the boy. The secret was the thread she tied through everything after. The way she taught me to check the forecast, the way some people check horoscopes, the way she kept slices of bread wrapped in cloth on the counter. A little old-fashioned, a little ceremonial. She spoke of water like a person you should always greet. She asked me to learn to swim late, stern, and gentle. Outside, a soft rain began. It painted the window screen with a gauze that trembled. I stood and let the set in. Wet pavement, cool dirt. The electric tang that arrives just before thunder. I closed my eyes and heard the music box's failing bird trying to sing beyond its tail. I felt the alphabet rearrange itself behind my teeth. A new space opening where the old letter had been. I poured water into a glass, and it sounded like someone telling the truth. In the kitchen, the light was honey thick. I set the handkerchief on the table and watched the red thread glow as if waking. I pressed my thumb to my own wrist and found the pulse. The rope didn't live there, only the proof that I did. I whispered her sentence back to her, for the day you forgive the child you were. It occurred to me that my grandmother built a house strong enough to hold a river. All those quiet rooms, all those slow breaths, all those rituals were levees. Guilt had slept beside her, yes, but so had love tactile, daily, served on a plate with the crusts cut for me, with a napkin folded into a soft square. I turned off the kitchen light, and the rain's voice grew louder, confidant. When I returned to her room, I slid the notebook back into the oilcloth, then paused. The swallow's tail lay where I had left it. I picked it up and held the broken metal to the music box's body. It fit. A simple seam waited only for glue and patience. The swallow would never be new again, but it might sing without wobbling. In the mirror's corner, the window lilt of light nodded. I don't know when I will go back to the river, or if the river is a place and not simply a verb in my family's language. But I know now what I carry. I know the taste rain leaves on a mouth that has been honest. I know how a thread travels from a child's needle to a grown woman's sleeve, to a granddaughter's fingertip, warm as a living vein. The handkerchief was so delicate I was afraid of my hands. I folded it along its old crease, red letters meeting red letters, and it made a soft sound like lips pressing to a cheek. I returned it to the trunk and replaced the tin lid on the music box with care, as if I were putting a blanket over a sleeping thing. In me, a small door swung on its hinge. The night sounded like my grandmother's breathing used too slow, measured, possessing that intimate hush of someone who knows you are in the room. I spoke to her anyway, to the space where she had collected the air. I told her about the alphabet, about the water, about the boy who whistled. The house answered by settling deeper into its timbers, and my name felt less heavy in my mouth. Morning came in thin bands of gray and apricot, and the house resumed its careful breathing. I made tea just to hear the quiet water climb the kettle. Steam lifted and wrote a message on the window, then erased itself before I could read it. I called my mother. Her voice arrived with the soft clutter of dishes behind her, a domestic percussion I knew by heart. I told her about the trunk, the handkerchief, the river boy, the alphabet with a missing letter. Silence pulled between us. She taught me to skip L, to, my mother said finally. A confession folded inside a confession. When I was small, it felt like a game. Later, I understood it was a gap we were protecting. I didn't know its shape. Do you know where the mill stood? I asked. Paper clicked under her fingers, as if she were sifting memory by touch. There's a note in my old recipe book, she said, an address that never stopped being almost right. The address was more direction than destination. A thread pulled from a map. The village past the pear orchards. The road that forgets to be paved. The bend where the wind changes its mind. I wrote it down, and the pen trembled slightly before I left. I sat with the music box at the kitchen table. A thin line of glue bridged the swallow's tail to its body, a seam that I could follow, but the ear would forgive. I waited while the glue learned patience. The bus smelled like rubber and stale coffee, like years that had touched too many coats. Fields flattened into gold and then lifted into green, as if the land were practicing breathing exercises. I counted fence posts the way my grandmother had counted stitches. When we crossed a bridge, I pressed my thumb to my wrist, not because I feared the rope, but because I wanted to feel the warm, credible thud of blood. A child across the aisle watched the river as if it could answer questions. The village was a handful of houses cupped by hills. The mill was no longer a building, but a foundation wrapped in weeds. The idea of a structure holding its breath. The river lay beside it, pewter in places, in others the color of old tea. I stood, and the air moved around me like an animal unsure of my intention. The scent of damp grain rose from the stones, a ghost spice. On a bent iron hook, a rope still hung in a threadbare loop, as if practicing being a memory. An elderly woman approached with a basket of laundry that smelled of sun. Her eyes were the color of paper left in a window too long. She looked at my face, then at my hands, then at the river. "You've come late," she said, not unkindly. "I'm looking for someone who once lived beyond the pear trees," I said. Twins were born this summer, the river swelled. Her mouth softened at a private horizon. "I am one of them," she answered. "My brother is bones and birds now. I am clothes and soup." We sat on a low wall. She set the basket between us, a quiet truce. I told her what I had read, what my grandmother had carried. The red letters stitched small and neat. The woman's hands made slow circles on her skirt, as if smoothing ears. "Luca would have gone to the water anyway," she said. "He made friends with edges. He believed the river liked him back." She looked at the rope. "But we do not measure blame here. We only measure bread and rain. Your grandmother was loved. I offered the handkerchief, but kept my fingers on one corner, unwilling to unname the object." The woman touched the thread with a fingertip darkened by dye. "She can keep it," she said, though we both knew that she meant me. "It belongs to the hands that tremble for it." We walked the path that once took children to school and now took cattle to shade. Dragonflies wrote a legible cursive over puddles. At the water's lip, reeds made a sound like a small choir warming up. I took the music box from my bag and wound it. The melody entered the air like a shy animal emerging from brush. It wasn't clean. It wavered, as if remembering how to stand. The swallow lifted its head, and I imagined the tail's glue as a new scar that did not apologize. The river listened without blinking. I could have tossed the handkerchief then. made a ceremony out of letting go. Instead, I dipped one edge into the water and watched the red dye refuse to bleed. The thread held. It had been tested by too many storms to be undone by a gesture. The twin and I stacked 3 flattish stones into a tower barely committed to being a tower at all. We did it because our hands asked to do something. We lose and we stack, she said. Sometimes the stacking is enough. We stood until our shadows touched. In the shade of the mill's rib cage, she told me how her mother had weaned grief the way you wean a child by degrees, by soft substitutions. How, for years, she kept an extra loaf near the stove as if bread could bargain with a river. I felt the story settle in me like a warm weight when I rose to leave. The twin pressed a folded paper into my palm. My brother's name, she said. You might want to say it out loud without guilt-chewing at the consonants. The name was a smooth stone in my mouth. It did not break my teeth. On the bus back, I practiced the alphabet and placed L back in its chair. It didn't complain. It crossed its legs and waited for me to continue. The fields wore late light like a shawl with holes in it. Somewhere beyond the hills, rain rehearsed Dot at home. The house welcomed me with the smell of itself, a blend of lemon oil, dust, and pages that had something to say if you listened with your fingertips. I placed the notebook, the music box, and the handkerchief on the table like 3 witnesses. I called my mother again and said the boy's name. I heard her exhale as if she had been holding her breath for a season and had finally reached a bench. Thank you, she said, and somewhere in the line a door sounded, as if it had remembered how to open. That night I dreamed a bridge that did not need rope. It knew it would hold because it had learned the vocabulary of weight. Children crossed with wet hems and dry eyes, and my grandmother stood on one bank, counting them softly like stitches in a patient winter. I woke before dawn and wrote a letter to my grandmother anyway. Dear you who taught me bread should be wrapped in cloth. Dear you who aligned cutlery like compass needles. Dear you who skipped L until it could return unafraid. I told her what the river had said by saying nothing. I took the letter to the small city park where a fountain performed the idea of a spring. I sat on a bench and read it aloud to water, pretending to be more than pipes. The words sounded both too large and exactly my size. It felt like trying on a coat that belonged to us both. Back in her room, I dusted the dresser, righted the mirror by a fraction so it faced both window and me. I set the music box there and wound it once, not for the song, but for the way the gears agreed to work with what they had. The swallow bowed and did not break. I folded the handkerchief one last time and placed it beneath the music box to keep it from slipping. Red thread under silver bird, river under house, name under tongue. I pressed my thumb to my wrist and counted to 13, and did not skip any number on the way. Outside, the sky bleached itself into morning. The weather in her room tilted toward ordinary, the kind of ordinary that requires daily courage. I stood in the doorway, the way I had after the funeral, but this time my palms were dry, ready to touch the day without apology. I went to the kitchen and sliced bread with the good knife, the one that announced its progress through crust with a song like small saws. I wrapped one slice in cloth and left it on the counter the way she had, a ritual that meant we were still in conversation. When rain finally did arrive, it did not ask permission. It touched the house in its old places and found them willing. In the thin mirror of the window, I watched my own face and said the boy's name again, then my grandmother's, then mine, and they braided without tearing. There are secrets that rot. Hers did not. It preserved, like fruit under sugar, like memories pressed between pages, until the leaf takes the paper's shape, and the paper takes the leaf's. What she carried was heavy because it was dear, not because it was monstrous. If I ever have a child, I will teach them to swim before fear learns their wrist. I will tell them that bridges are verbs and that water remembers kindness longer than dare. I will keep a handkerchief in a drawer, not for tears, but for names at dusk. I opened the notebook to the last page and found a sentence I had missed. Pencil faint as breath on glass. Keep the letter L, it stands for what we lose and what we learn. I read it twice. The room dimmed and did not darken. I wound the music box one more time and set it by the window. The swallow's tail held. The melody was truer now, not perfect, but committed. Outside, the street lights lifted their small suns. Inside, the air ripened and moved. I stood there and let the house listen back.